where I now have knowledge to know what to do when officers decide that they want to press me when I have my cell phone out? Or do you know the rights that you will have when you see someone else being pressed, with the officer or traffic citation, whatever the case may be? You know how to handle these situations. And you have someone on this call, you have two individuals on this call right now that can be able to help with our situations that we see on a day-to-day basis. So without further ado, I would like to first pass the microphone to Mr. Attorney Timothy Peterkin. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. The floor is yours, sir.
Oh, thank you. And we can work together on Attorney Marshall. If you want to unmute him as well, we're just going to speak together. That's okay with you guys.
Absolutely.
And I was thinking about it this morning. I'm happy to be here. Of course, I'm always happy to engage in community education, but it's also sad. I was thinking about in my career as a lawyer, I could talk to this group about estate planning. I could talk to you about business formation. I could talk to you about a lot of things. But you asked me to come on because it's hard to talk about wealth generation when you're concerned about your safety. And I understand that. And so that's an appropriate thing to discuss as well. It's just from a lawyer's perspective, we often think about the many different things that we actually do for our clients and versus the things that catch their attention. And so recently, there's been a lot of talk about police officers and safety issues. And so that's something we certainly can talk about because there is, fortunately or unfortunately, there is a legal analysis that goes along with your interaction with the police. And there's a thing that I learned very early in law school, that ignorance of the law is no excuse. What does that mean? That means that regardless of whether you know what the rule is or not, you're held accountable for that. And so that means we as lawyers have an obligation to educate our community. I assure you that the CEO of Walmart is surrounded by lawyers. You understand? He doesn't make a move without having a lawyer. So why should that be different for people in our community? And so that's something that we're happy to be a part of. Attorney Marshall?
I definitely echo those words, Attorney Peterkin. One thing we have realized is that, the amount that you have in that
Attorney Marshall, I want to believe that your signal is a little weak. It's hard to hear you.
We recently saw the video of the individual about Marvel Comics, but still, when it came to facing
Attorney Marshall, is there somewhere else that you can go in your home that you can have a better signal? Attorney
Well, you have a call-in feature as well for him?
Yes. I'm going to send it to Josh.
Okay, well, while he's doing that, I'll just get started and let's start talking about the first interaction. And so the first thing that people think about is the average person has interaction with the police when they have a traffic stop, right? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what you should not do, can and cannot do inside of that context. Unfortunately, that initial interaction is the thing that escalates. As you can imagine, the officer generally doesn't come up to you and immediately begin a confrontation. It starts with this thing we call, have you guys heard of a Terry stop? I'm sure you've heard of stop and frisk, right? That thing in New York where they could just stop you. And the concept is that the officer has to have what they call reasonable suspicion, which is actually a pretty low standard. Reasonable suspicion that something has happened and the officer wants to investigate. And so let me give you an example. The officer was told that someone meeting your basic description just robbed the liquor store, Okay, that means the basic description would be a 6 foot tall black man, 200 pounds, brown skin. Okay, that may describe 25% of the people on the call. But okay, that's what the officer was told. So lo and behold, he turns and he sees you, and you fit that description. So does that give the officer reasonable suspicion to come up and approach you? What do you guys think about that? That those facts, nothing else, does that officer have that standard of reasonable suspicion to walk up to you and begin to engage in a conversation? Some people on the chat are saying yes. Yeah, and you're correct. Now the problem with that, the answer is yes. The problem with that is you didn't rob the liquor store, right? And so think about what your reaction would be if an officer walks up to you as you're minding your business and saying, hey, I want to talk to you because somebody just robbed a liquor store. You're thinking, well, why are you talking to me? You know, why? And some people may object to this interaction. You may object to that interaction because obviously you didn't rob the liquor store. But the problem is, and this is a legal problem, the problem is that you don't know what was in the officer's head. In the officer's head, that's how the court is going to ultimately address the situation. They're going to ask the officer, what information did you have that made you reasonably suspicious that something was happening? And then the officer will tell the judge one day that I received a call that the man was black, he was 6 feet tall, he was 200 pounds, he was brown skinned, and he was in this area. And that's exactly where I saw James, right? And so that's why I walked up to James and started speaking to James. So let's think about the different ways a person would react. One person would say, officer, I'm not going to talk to you. Get away from me. I know what my rights are. The officer says, I want to see your ID. And the person that refuses to give the officer's ID and begins to walk away. Well, the problem with that, this person is ultimately going to be charged with something called resisting and delaying or obstruction of justice. That's a misdemeanor in most states, and this person actually would be convicted of that. That's, I don't make the law, I explain the law. And so that's what the law says. And so is it an accurate defense that the officer was wrong? No, because that's not the standard. That would be the standard if the person was charged criminally with robbing a liquor store and the state has to prove evidence that you robbed a liquor store. At this very moment, we are not in the standard in the criminal world where it's beyond a reasonable doubt standard. That's a very high standard, but that's in a criminal courtroom. We're talking about outside of a liquor store at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's what we're talking about. And in that moment, that standard is actually much lower. And so the question is, what do you do in that situation? Well, from a legal perspective, you actually would comply. Now, does that say that you don't have rights? Does that say that you just turn over and do whatever the officer says? You comply to the extent that is reasonable. The law says the officer has the right to investigate. So you stand there and you calmly give the officer your ID. You explain to the officer that you couldn't have robbed a liquor store because you were a mile away when it happened and whatever. And the officer says, in the ideal scenario, he says, thank you for your cooperation, and you walk on about your business. Then you follow up with the police station and you file a complaint because perhaps the officer should not have just stopped every black man in the neighborhood that day. That was inappropriate. But there's a point in time in which you fight. One of my favorite sayings is, I fight with a suit on now. And so back in the day, when we were, riding the bus to school, I don't know how old you are, we used to have fist fights, but back in, maybe you all are too young to do that. You fought with other stuff. We used to have fist fights. And so we would fight when someone said something about your mama, you would fight them. But today I put a suit on, I put a tie, I walk into the court, and that's when I fight. And that's what I encourage people to do, because it is in a difficult, you are in an unwinnable situation when you seek to fight, when you're standing outside a liquor store talking to this officer who legally has a reasonable suspicion to ask you for your ID. And I wish I had something else to say to you about that, but that is what the law says. But before I think Attorney Marshall's back, before I turn it back over to him, I want to point out this. Let's assume some of you are offended by what I just said and you don't like it, okay? Well, I want you to appreciate how the law became the law in your state. Someone tell me that. That will be helpful. How did the law actually become law in your state? This law that says an officer has reasonable suspicion to stop you, because that doesn't have to be the law, but that is the law right now. It actually came, people are saying they're voting. Yes, you voted for your legislators and they wrote the law and they created a bill that said an officer only has to have reasonable suspicion, and it's a very low standard, which then he interprets to let him go stop everybody who was 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, brown skin, and standing in that basic area. That did not have to be the law. How many, in most states, the people who are in charge of law enforcement would be the sheriff of your county? How many of you can appreciate, how many of you can tell me how does a sheriff get into position? The sheriff in your county, how does your sheriff get his or her job? The sheriff is elected, exactly. That's what people are saying. The sheriff was elected. So you voted for the sheriff. So the anger that you have about the answer that I'm giving you needs to be directed in the right way. There were people you elected who voted to create a law that says that the police officer could stop you. When the police are not behaving the way they're supposed to behave, they are under the leadership of the sheriff who you also elected. So the other two things that I see in the same realm, we get upset when a person is not charged. In most jurisdictions, who makes the charging decision? Who decides whether we're going to prosecute someone or not? Anybody know that? Who's going to decide who is prosecuted in your jurisdiction? Exactly. People are chiming in and saying it's the DA. And I don't even need to ask you, because I know you know the answer. How did the DA get into position? You voted for him as well, exactly. You voted for the DA. And so you're upset that the DA is not charging people with stuff. Well, why did you vote for them? Or why did you not vote at all and not pay attention to the election? And of course, you all know the judges are elected as well. And so I say that because sometimes in these conversations, when we start out by saying, yes, you have to give the officer your ID. Yes, it's better to cooperate. That's not that empowering, stand up for your rights moment that people are thinking that we're going to say, but that's actually what the law says. But that is because of the people who were in position to make that. So if you don't think that's the right thing to do, then you have the ability to change that. You're in fact not powerless. So that's what I wanted to begin by saying, and we can start with any questions you guys have and see if Attorney Marshall's back now.
I want to say he's muted. Let's see if we can get that. He's on the.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm getting an echo on my end.
If you have two devices, Attorney Marshall, one of the devices, you're gonna have to take off the audio. So if you're on your phone and your computer, you're gonna have to leave the audio on your computer so you can just be on your phone. But if you have two devices in the same room, you're gonna continue to get the echo.
Okay, so I think I've got to take you care of. Sorry, I was using two devices. I didn't know whether the audio was coming to the phone or the computer. Perfect. But hopefully you all can hear me.
Perfect.
And I definitely want to echo what Attorney Peterkin said. Even though I am a lawyer, background is actually in public policy and working in the political sphere. And one of the things that I, as often as I can, is that the power of the vote. And even though we are in a presidential cycle, and in a presidential cycle that ends up sucking most of the air out of the room when people start talking about voting rights and showing up at the polls, reminding people of the impact of these local elections. The fact that your DA is elected, the fact that in most states, your judges are elected. As Attorney Peterkin said, your sheriff is elected. the chief of police is appointed by the mayor or the city council, depending on where you live, who are elected officials. So if there, and unfortunately, people do not show up at these local elections. I live here in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I've worked on a number of campaigns for city council candidates. And normally when city council election and municipal elections roll around, there's about 15% voter turnout. So in a city of over 500,000 people, less than 15% of the people show up to elect the city council that then appoints the police chief, talks about where development occurs. So people are upset about gentrification. All of those come back to those local elections. But I know that's a little off task from what you all invited me on to speak about, but I cannot stress that point enough to make sure that you show up at the ballots, and not just show up, but make sure that you're educated about these people running for these local offices, because they live in your community. They live in your neighborhood. I probably will not meet the president of the United States, but I know exactly where everybody in my city council, where they live. I can drive to their house if I need to. So making sure that you are invested in who your state legislator is and things like that. But going back to what Attorney Peterkin said, just some general rules as far as what your rights are. And, he kind of talked about the Terry stop. When you have a right, you've been stopped. So if the police end up stopping you, to begin with, you have a right to remain silent. Those Miranda rights, they exist even prior to you being Mirandized. So we know that in the United States, the police officers are supposed to remind you of your right against self-incrimination. If you see any cop drama, you already know what the Miranda right is, that you have a right to remain silent. Anything you say or do can be held against you in a court of law. But even before the police, so if they ask you any questions about where you're going, where you're traveling from, what you're doing, legally, you don't have to respond. Some states, and one of the things that makes this difficult is that there are a lot of different state laws that conflict. So knowing, I wish I was tested to know all 50 state laws when it comes to this, but some states do require you to provide your name and identity, and that officers can arrest you for doing so. But in most states, you do have the right to remain silent from the get-go. I will say that I would recommend, for basic questions like your name, producing identification, that you do submit those to answer those questions if law enforcement can stop you. Typically, whether you're driving, whether you're stopped in a car, or you don't, or police show up at your house, you don't have to search. Now, the police can pat down if they suspect there's a weapon on you. Now, for officers say they can pat you down if they suspect a weapon, but they ask your home, ask to search your belongings, every right to know,
it's a little choppy.
No. In those situations. Now, are some people you saying you suspected there's probably that the bank putting a symbol on,
Attorney Marshall, what you're saying right now sounds so good, and I really want everyone to hear exactly what you just said, but it's still really, really choppy. Is there a way that you can call in?
I think he's on the call in.
Is he on the call in? Oh, it just sounds so good. Everyone needs to hear this.
He must have hung up from the call in.
I can share another point as you're trying to help him get set up in the back end, okay?
Okay.
So I wanted to talk to you about two things. First, there's a rule that talks about you can't deny the officer's ability to engage in an investigation. But sometimes the officer is saying, he's going to say on the back end, I wasn't investigating, I was just communicating. So in other words, let's say there was no call that the officer had that caused him to think that a 6 foot tall, 200-pound brown skinned black man had robbed a liquor store. Let's just say he just saw you and he wanted to talk to you. And again, both situations look exactly the same, right? Because you don't know what was in his head. Okay, so now the officer walks up to you, it's the exact same situation. He says, hey, I'd like to talk to you. What I want you to say is, officer, is this a consensual encounter? That's the part you can write down. You're going to ask the officer, is this a consensual encounter? What does that do? That requires the officer to tell you whether you are in a custodial situation or not. I don't want you to guess, because if the officer is engaging in an investigation, you can't leave. You can't deny the request. If the officer is engaging in an actual investigation, you have to comply. But the problem is, you don't know whether he's engaging in an actual legitimate investigation or that he just wants to talk to you. So I say to the officer, he walks up to me and he says, can I see your ID? I say, officer, with all due respect, could you please tell me whether this is a consensual encounter or not? And if he said, and the officer, then they're trained, please understand, officers get trainings all the time about how to do this. They don't want you to ask that question, because if they didn't have reasonable suspicion, they have to admit this is a consensual encounter. And what happens if someone is asking for you to consensually do something? You can do what? You then, and only then, can you say no. So I don't want you to guess about it, because you guess wrong, you're going to get in trouble. You ask the officer, is this consensual? Are you asking me to consent to giving you my ID? Are you asking me to consent to staying here and talking to you? He says, yes, I'm asking you to consent. Well, with all due respect, I'm not going to consent. I don't do that. I don't do that. I was stopped by an officer one day, and the officer, it was a regular traffic stop, but then for some reason he asked me if he could search my vehicle. Well, I truly have nothing to hide. However, I am not interested in engaging in a consensual encounter of this nature. So what did I say? Officer, am I allowed to deny this request? In other words, is this a consensual encounter? And the officer says yes. Well then, guess what? I don't consent. And it's over. And I left. And so that's how it's done. You need to know that, because if it wasn't consensual, because remember the original scenario, if the officer had reasonable suspicion to believe something, I wouldn't have known. You understand? I would have no way of knowing that. So I have to ask him, and then he has to tell me, no, this is not consensual. I have reasonable suspicion. So if the officer says, no, this is not consensual, then I need to comply, and I will comply, and I will do so. That's the difference. I did want to make sure you understood that. And so I respectfully decline consensual requests, but anything else I will certainly comply with.
So I am back. I'm sorry that my internet's doing some Teddy Riley stuff going on right now, but I'm on my phone. So again, if there's any echo, please feel free to let me know. But thank you, Attorney Peterkin, for filling in. But one of the things about that consensual stop, and what I would always recommend anybody do, is if the police request a search, you have every right to say no. And in most cases, I would recommend that you do say no, unless, again, as Attorney Peterkin stated, that it was not a consensual stop. And so anytime that you are stopped on the street, if they want to stop and search your belongings, if they show up at your house and they want to search without a search warrant, or if you're pulled over on the side of the road and they want to search your vehicle, you have every right to turn down a police search. Now, one of the things that the police do have the ability to, and this went to the Supreme Court, is that whether or not the police have the ability to lie to you. and to lie to you about, what your rights are. And unfortunately, they are in many cases. They can lie to you and say, well, we saw you coming out of the store or whatever, but or they'll try to say something to the effect of, well, if you have nothing to hide, then you shouldn't have any reason to turn down a search. Again, legally, you have every right to turn down a search, but police can search your vehicle under without a warrant under 5 kind of special circumstances. So the first one is that if you consent, so if a police officer asks you to search your car, you say yes, they have a right to search your vehicle. If there's also what's called the plain view doctrine. If I'm driving, the police stop me and I have a bag of marijuana, if I have a down bag of marijuana sitting there in open view in the passenger seat, the officer can then search just because they witnessed something illegal in the vehicle. So they can search for that. Even if I say, no, you can't search my vehicle, if it's sitting out in plain sight, whether it be vehicle or house, they can see into my living room and see, illegal weapons. They can override my refusal of a search then. You also have searches in incident to arrest. Once they arrest you, then yes, they have the reason to search your vehicle then. Even if the arrest has nothing to do with what they're actually searching for. So let's just say I get pulled over for a DUI. Officers can, they confirm that, I was under suspicion of driving under the influence. They do a breathalyzer. Breathalyzer shows that I am under the influence. They arrest me. At that point, they can search my vehicle. And if they find something illegal, even if it has nothing to do with, my intoxicated state, those can then become charges against me to be charged in other fashion. So if they find illegal weapons in there, now they can charge me for the DUI and for having a weapon. The fourth one is if they have probable cause to suspect a crime. Again, if in Attorney Peterkin's example, if they're saying, or just a different example, let's just say that they're trying to investigate an assault and, they pull me over. I've got a black eye, bloody nose, there's blood on my car seat, on the passenger seat. At that point, they have probable cause to kind of suspect that there was a crime that occurred. It's not illegal to have a bloody nose, it's not illegal to have a black eye, but obviously if they have that in connection with a report of an assault going on, they can search me then. And then the last one would be exigent circumstances, where basically they believe that evidence is going to be destroyed. And sometimes you'll see these with the kind of no-knock warrants. I know the Breonna Taylor situation in Louisville, some people had questions on why would they execute a no-knock warrant, especially since they had the person in custody. If they believe that, even though they had a warrant in that situation, if they believe that evidence would be destroyed, at that point they can enter the property even without a search warrant. So if police are chasing, let's just say police are chasing me, I have drugs on me, they know I have drugs on me, I go into my house, I'm getting ready to flush them down the toilet. At that point, they can enter the house and search the house, even without my consent, because they believe that evidence will be destroyed if they do not act urgently. So those are kind of the 5 scenarios where police can override your denial of a search or your refusal to be searched. And I see the message that Chris typed, that your situation, that they told you that they would give you a traffic violation if they didn't search your vehicle. In that situation, that's kind of what Attorney Peterkin talked about as far as the Terry stop. They had a reason to stop you. They had a legal reason to stop you. I'm guessing whatever those traffic violations may have been, whether that was speeding, broken taillight, or whatever. And even if they're fishing for something else, let's just say they pull somebody over, and we saw this with the Walter Scott situation in Charleston. They pulled him over for a broken taillight. Now, the questions may have been about something else. I do believe he had an outstanding arrest warrant for back child support. But even if they're searching for something else, all they need is to say that they stopped you for a valid reason, that there was speeding, that there was a broken taillight, that there was any number of traffic violations that gave them the right to stop you, even if they were looking for something else. And one of the things, even though me and Attorney Peterkin, we talk about these hypotheticals and, we lay out these scenarios and fact patterns, one thing about life is that it's a lot easier to create these hypotheticals as far as which should the law be in the situation. Unfortunately, facts get very murky as far as, what officers may say, what officers may do, different fact patterns may exist. So we'll just kind of give you the general overview, but obviously on a day-to-day, these scenarios may not be as clear-cut. But one of the things that you want to do is make sure that you are vocal and clear as far as, refusing those rights to searching, making sure that you are executing your rights as far as asking for an attorney, staying quiet. Because let's just give an example and say that you refuse a search. Officers stop you for say what they say is speeding. You refuse the search. They ask you to search your vehicle. You refuse that search, and they search anyways. And when they search, they find illegal contraband, whether it be drugs, weapons, or whatever. They find illegal contraband during that search. That's where attorneys end up making their money because of the fact that it becomes an illegal search. Therefore, that evidence cannot be used in a trial against you. So if you are able to show up and say, I refuse the search, they had no probable cause to search me. This was a consensual stop. I expressed my desire to leave, and they held me there and conducted the search anyways. At that point, the judge would have to throw that evidence out. And that evidence could not be used against you, even if they have, a literal smoking gun sitting there. They cannot use that evidence to convict you if it was obtained through an illegal traffic stop or an illegal stop or an illegal search. So that's why it's very, very important regarding making sure that you vocally express your rights. One of the other things I did want to talk about was reporting police. Obviously, in a lot of these situations, the only reason why it's made the news was because there was a legal reporting. And your rights as far as reporting police and what's recommended. The individuals in the case in Minnesota with George, they did everything right. What you want to do is you want to record, stand at a safe distance. Stand at a safe distance. You do not need to hide the fact that you're recording. So the courts have come out and said that police do not have a reasonable expectation of privacy when they're doing their jobs. And that means that you have the right to record them. And the people that they're interacting with may have some privacy rights, so you would notify them of the recording. In certain states, you are required to notify them of the recording, but don't try to hide the fact that you're recording. You can make it, plain and obvious that you are recording. But you do have the right to observe, record anything that's plainly visible in public spaces. Officers cannot confiscate or demand to view any photographs or videos without a warrant. So if they try to take your cameras, make sure you again, record that, make sure you get officer badge numbers, badge names, in order so that you can make your report. One of the things Attorney Peterkin said that I wholeheartedly agree with is that you're not going to win a fight with the police out on the streets. It's kind of one of those things where you want to comply and fight later. So again, if an officer is trying to get you to stop recording, you don't have to do that. Now, obviously, if it becomes a situation where it becomes dangerous to you and threatening to you to continue doing those photographs and record, make sure that you comply. Like I said, comply to live to fight another day. Make sure you get badge numbers and names. Let me see a comment. That information is wrong. Again, if you are in a public space, you have the right to record. Again, there are certain states that require you to tell people that you're recording them, but every court decision I've read has said that police do not have a reasonable expectation of privacy in doing their job. So again, officers can tell you you can't record, but legally, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. And to the other point, I understand that, a lot of people can't afford bail, and there's a big need for bail reform in this country. But as far as the idea of complying and complaining later, I understand that there's a certain level of privilege that comes with that. You know, obviously, if you can afford bail, if you can afford an attorney, or don't have to rely on a court-appointed attorney, you're in a better position to do that. But the alternative is you getting into a fight on the street with a police officer, and you will never win that case. So I understand that there's a certain level of privilege of saying, you know, comply and complain later, and you know, how that may disproportionately impact people who are less privileged, or, you know the system less, or have fewer networking connections to law enforcement, to attorneys, to judges. But again, you know, if you find me a situation where somebody on the street complains with an officer, disagrees with the officer, vocally complains with the officer, and then gets away, like I said, those situations don't exist. So, so I mean, it's always, is running a crime? If it is not a consensual stop, then yes. So as Attorney Peterkin stated, that if you say, you know, if you ask, is this consensual, is this consensual encounter, and the officer says yes, you have every right to leave, and you know, I wouldn't even run. I just say, okay, well, I'm leaving, and you can leave then. But if they suspect you of committing a crime, and they tell you to stop, and you do not, then it becomes evading arrest or resisting arrest. And at that point, it does become a crime. And depending on what they're trying to stop you for, then there are escalating levels of force that they can use. If they believe that you are a threat or a danger to the public, then they are allowed to use lethal force even if you are fleeing. So I would be very, very careful about you know, I would not recommend anybody run from the police. But again, if it's a consensual stop, you can announce calmly that you're going to leave. What do we do if we see an officer abusing their power? At that point, I would recommend that you pull out your phones and report. I mean, in a lot of these cases, they become public light, and obviously, if there's any kind of complaint to the police or any kind of investigation by the police, that video becomes evidence of an officer abusing the power. And so unfortunately, that is the power that we have, is recording this and documenting this evidence, so that when there is a complaint, that there's evidence of this abuse of power. I'm not exactly sure what the individuals in Minnesota could have done differently in the George Floyd situation. I think that they acted accordingly by recording, by, you know, speaking with the police, trying to, you know, get them to recognize the man was in physical distress. So, I mean, I think that they did everything they were supposed to do. I've seen some people float the idea on social media that they should have gotten more actively involved and engaged physically with the police. Again, I don't see how that would have bettered the situation for anyone. They would have been either sitting in jail or laying next to George Floyd at the end of the day. Is there a law that gives you a right to fight back? Not against the police. So, I mean, and I guess one of the other things we could have talked about was the citizens arrest laws. And in those situations, I'm not a proponent of citizens arrest laws. I would not recommend anybody actually trying to execute any kind of citizens arrest. And obviously, in those citizens arrest laws, one of the issues of those citizens arrest laws is that they conflate with a lot of the self-defense laws. I mean, if somebody is trying to stop you and detain you, you have a legal right to defend yourself. The question was, what is a citizens arrest law? So going back, citizens arrest law, they come news recently because of the Ahmaud Arbery case. We know that the McMichaels were pursuing him, and they tried to detain him under, or at least they floated the idea that they were trying to detain him under citizens arrest law. Most states have a citizens arrest law, which basically deputizes citizens to be able to arrest individuals if they suspect a crime, generally a felony. Some states will allow misdemeanors. I know North Carolina, it has to be a felony. Certain states require a certain class felony, whether it's a class C, D, E felony. One of the issues with that is most people don't, unless you are a lawyer, most people don't know what a Class A felony is versus a Class E felony. Most people struggle with the difference between a felony and misdemeanor. Some crimes are a felony only after a certain severity. So if I steal $1, that's technically theft, and it's a misdemeanor. But if I steal $1,000 or $5,000, then it becomes a felony, because there's a dollar value differentiating a misdemeanor between a felony. So that's one reason why I'm not a big fan of those laws. Georgia was a felony as well. Yeah, Georgia's citizens arrest law does require people to arrest people if they witness a felony. And so the citizens arrest laws, they've been around for a long time. In my research, they've been around since about 1245. And the issue was that there wasn't any kind of organized police force. So it allowed the king to deputize individuals to make arrests of others on behalf of helping out maintaining order within the kingdom. And it's just been kind of passed through common law all the way to the United States. Most of U.S. laws come from British common law. And every state has some form of citizens arrest, either in common law or in statute. North Carolina, it's in statute again, and Georgia, it's statute. But with those citizens arrest laws, if you witness somebody committing a felony, it gives you the ability to, restrain that individual until police come, and you can turn those individuals over to police. One of the big reasons why they do that is because those laws exist is because it removes liability from those individuals. If you can imagine, let's just say I'm on the street, I see somebody who snatches somebody's purse, and I step in and I stop them, but in the process of stopping them, I break their arm. Without a citizen's arrest law, that person who I broke their arm could then sue me for breaking their arm, and I would be legally liable for paying their damages. Under a citizen's arrest law, if I can make the statement that I was, acting under the citizen's arrest law and stopping them, they no longer have that right to sue me. And, if you think about it from a general practical standpoint, like if you see somebody, old woman walking and getting her purse robbed, and you can step in and stop them, why would, we would like you to do that, as long as you can do that, safely and reasonable, and stop that person, detain that person. The problem comes in is where these laws conflict with other self-defense laws. So where a citizen's arrest law may conflict with a stand your ground law, where if somebody is trying to exert any kind of force on you, if somebody's trying to exert any kind of force on you, you have the right to counter with your own force. And that can escalate to deadly force, as it did in the Ahmaud Arbery situation. He had every right to run through that neighborhood. Under their citizens arrest law, if they believe that they were witnessing a felony, they now have the legal right to stop, Mr. Arbery. If he feels like he is being threatened, he has the right to fight back, or at least, use force against the individual trying to stop him, and then deadly force ends up being used. So I would say those citizen arrest laws end up being very, very, they end up conflicting with some other laws, which end up creating, they conflict with some other laws, which end up making a more dangerous situation for everybody. So, as far as citizens, I wouldn't recommend anybody do a citizen's arrest either. I see some other questions going through. What is it considered when the police are breaking the law? It's still the police breaking the law. If you get it on video, if you record it, they are, there are certain instances where police are immune from certain laws if they're going through and executing the due diligence of their duties. If you can imagine somebody, if they're executing the due diligence of their duties, there's certain laws that they can break. There's a law against speeding, but in a high-speed chase, the cops can outspeed, as long as they're diligently executing their duties. In situations where they have abused their duties, such as, the George Floyd situation or the Walter Scott situation, where we see them actually kill somebody when deadly force is not necessary, it is illegal. It can be prosecuted. It can be prosecuted, and the individuals. But the problem is that kind of goes back to the point that me and Attorney Peterkin were making earlier. The DA has the ability to decide what can be prosecuted. They have what's called prosecutorial discretion, which they can determine whether or not, whether or not they want to pursue charges, what charges they want to pursue. They just got to convince a court to go along with it if they try to, pursue anything beyond what the evidence shows. And so the problem in this situation and in the McMichael situation is that the DAs who are over the case made the prosecutor, they use their discretion not to pursue charges. We see in the case of George Floyd, the prosecutor in Minneapolis basically kind of, like I said, if he wanted to have those officers arrested, he could. That if he wanted to have those individuals arrested, he could. He's just not doing that yet. Same thing in Georgia with the Ahmaud Arbery situation. If the DA had on the spot said, we want to press charges, we want to charge him with murder, he could have. He just didn't until the DA was replaced by another, was given to a state DA who then pressed charges 2 months later. So that goes back to making sure, and Mark D, thank you, basically making sure you get the right DA. Make sure you know who your DA is. If you do not know who your district attorney is, or you have not investigated, because in most places they are up for election right now. They're going up for election in 2020. So make sure you know who your DA is. And if you don't know, make sure you become aware of who that DA is. And if you do not like their background, if you do not like their track record, if you do not like some of the things they present as, make sure you get you vote another DA in. To the question of what about registered gun owners shooting an intruder? Yes, you can defend yourself in the home. That's the Castle Doctrine, which has been expanded to the Stand Your Ground laws. If you are in your home and there is an intruder, you do have the right to use lethal force at that point. And I'd say there's not really much gray area there. Most states have a Castle Doctrine. And that doesn't necessarily go to the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is your right to own weapons. I guess you're right as far as when you can use those weapons and use deadly force against somebody else is kind of where that law kicks in. But yes, if you're a registered gun owner, could we in a deadly situation like George Floyd if we outnumber the police? No, I mean, not legally. I would not. And again, as an attorney, I would not recommend that. I don't see how that situation would have benefited anybody if anybody were to get involved and try to physically stop the police. If somebody I don't see how that. I don't see any circumstance where that would have benefited anyone. I mean, I guess maybe, there's an outside chance that maybe George Floyd could have survived had somebody else physically intervened. But at the same time, you're going to end up causing more of a commotion. More people are going to get arrested. More people are going to get hurt in doing that. I think that taking video and recording those instances is probably the best thing you can do in that situation. I would not recommend any kind of armed conflict or physical conflict with the police. What if they're outside and you shot? If they are on your property and you have reason to believe that they are on your property to commit any kind of crime or violence, then technically the Castle Doctrine is supposed to apply then. So I mean, like if you believe, obviously if somebody just drives up in your driveway and you start pulling out a shotgun and start shooting at them, then yeah, that's illegal. If you have reason to believe that they are there to commit violence or they are there to commit any kind of felony, breaking and entering, stealing, or anything like that, legally you do have the right to use lethal force to defend your home. Now, as far as out on the streets or I guess outside of your property, that's where kind of state laws kind of differ. If you're familiar with the Stand Your Ground laws that made their news after Trayvon Martin was killed, the Stand Your Ground laws basically stated that no matter where you are, if you feel like you are under threat of physical violence, of severe physical violence or death, that you can use lethal force to defend yourself. So that, under the Stand Your Ground law, you can do that. But again, that really depends on state law. I wish I knew all 50 state laws regarding this and could adequately apply them in all situations. Unfortunately, I don't. your ability to use your concealed weapon when you see somebody else being assaulted. Again, it's very, very fact pattern specific. Again, using the stand your ground laws, you can use lethal force when defending yourself or others from severe physical bodily harm and or life-threatening situation. Under states with those stand your ground laws, you can use your concealed weapon in those situations. But again, it's very fact pattern specific. I mean, what exactly, if you see, what exactly is the assault? What exactly is your view of it? Making sure that you can use that weapon with, if you are using that weapon to neutralize the target and you don't actually hit somebody else, what the state law says, because there are some states, again, without that stand your ground law where you don't have that authority. And I guess with the citizens arrest laws, technically you can use that concealed weapon to detain them until police come if you have a citizens arrest statute. If you don't kill them, can you be sued? Again, and I'll say I hate, this is one reason why people don't like lawyers. We answer every question with it depends. Again, in that case, it depends. It depends on the circumstances as far as, where they are, the situation that takes place. I mean, obviously, if I'm just in somebody's house and they pull out a weapon and shoot me, I can definitely sue them. If they can say that I was stealing something or I was trying to assault somebody, at that point, any lawsuit they have, will be weakened. And I will say that, I mean, technically, you can sue anybody for anything. The question is whether or not they're going to be able to get a judgment against you, which is the more appropriate question.
Awesome. That was the last question. If you two have any closing remarks.
So I guess I'll leave up. The only closing remark I can say is to make sure that we understand the system and we make sure that we exercise our franchise and vote. Like I said, we see a lot of these situations, and I said while there's a lot of anger in a lot of these situations, I think that a lot of these decisions could have a different outcome if we had the right leadership in place, and we have full authority of the leadership that we put in place by voting those individuals into office. One of my common sayings is that we may not always get the leadership we want, but we always get the leadership we deserve by the amount of effort we put in to recruiting candidates, electing candidates, getting out to vote, and making sure that we understand who these people are all the way down the ticket. Like I'm sure everybody knows who Joe Biden and Donald Trump are. But if I were to ask you who's your county DA, making sure people know the answer to that question. Who is your county sheriff? Making sure people know the answer to those questions. Because those local elections are important. The other thing I would have to say is, and it's unfortunate to say this, but in a lot of these situations, we don't have the full facts of what goes on. Anything you can do to record the full facts, do so. I mean, if you can take video, if you can get audio, you're more likely to have a more positive outcome. We're more likely to see justice that way. The only reason that the McMichaels are in jail now is because there was video of him being shot, and the protest and the outcry from that. It went 2 months without it. The only reason that we know about the George Floyd situation is because of the video, because I've seen the police report and they did not describe it the way that we saw on video. The only reason the officer who shot Walter Scott is in jail is because there was video of him shooting Walter Scott in the back. It wasn't until the video surfaced that charges were pursued. So it's unfortunate to say, but we need to make sure that we're documenting everything if we want justice.
And I would just end by saying something that I've been wanting to say for a while. So is this: if you're going to drive down the street smoking weed, don't have an expired registration tag. That is giving the officer the reason to stop you. There you go. Okay, take that for what it's worth. Because there's this thing called pretense. The officer can stop you because your registration tag expired, and then he smells the weed, and it escalates from there. If you didn't have the expired registration tag, he wouldn't have had a reason to stop you in the first place. Therefore, he never would have smelled the weed. You follow what I'm saying? And I have been wanting to say that for so long. So thank you, Ebony, for this opportunity. I have always wanted to tell my clients, if you're going to smoke weed, have all your other stuff straight.
Josh, do you have anything you want to say?
I just want to say thank you guys so much for coming. I mean, you guys didn't have to, like, literally, it was the last minute. You all came onto this call. You answered questions. You didn't have to do that as well. You didn't get paid to do any of this. So we thank you all, Attorney Marshall and Attorney Peterkin. Thank you so much for taking your time out of your morning to make sure that we are well equipped and well aware of our rights and things that we can be able to move forward with. So thank you all, Culture. Thank you all for getting on this call this morning. This is awesome. We're looking forward to doing this again. There's some more answers that need to be met, but guess what? Go research, all right? That is our job, is to research our information. So make sure you guys are plugged in to your local officials and knowing what your rights are. That starts one, all right? Well, voting is coming up. We need to start there first, all right? Before you go out in the streets to do anything, you need to know your rights. Who's in office right now, who's running for office right now. That's all I got.
Absolutely. Guys, again, thank you, Attorney Peterkin. Thank you, Attorney Marshall, as well. We really do appreciate you all. It's not often where people, come together like this and make sure that everyone understands your rights and different stuff that you can do in situations. So I thank you so much for being on here at 8 o'clock in the morning or wherever you are, whatever time it is. Thank you, definitely. And to Culture, guys, this thing is serious. All right. Everything that they said today, I hope you all wrote notes. I hope you took your time and really understood everything. The biggest thing that I got was, we need to understand the system and exercise our right to vote. Like that's it. That's the key right there. If you don't understand the system, if you don't understand your rights, if you don't understand what you can say, you're always going to be a casualty. You're always going to be a person who doesn't know. So you're going to put yourself in situations that you didn't have to be in if you knew. So just like, Attorney Timothy said, he said, ignorance of the law doesn't make it okay. So you have to educate yourself. Goes back to what we talked about on Wednesday. You have to educate yourself, and you have to research these people that we put in an office. And if you don't like them, then what are you going to do? Are you going to step up? Are you going to get more actively involved in politics? See, we want to ignore politics, but we can't do that because it affects us. It affects home. It affects our households. It affects our family. So we got to be more involved. Culture Investment Group will not be a group of people who falls casualty to the system because we don't know. That's not us. We will know. All right. So every Friday, expect to get something like this. Every Friday, expect to get educated by someone who has information that we need. And see, a lot of times we don't even know we need this information. We didn't even know that we can, ask an officer, can we decline? We didn't even know we can do that. So it's very, very important, guys. Like we always say, stay plugged in. We are not an ordinary group. So make sure you stay plugged in, stay, active, because everything that we're going to do, when we say we do it for the culture, that's what we mean. So we've been on here for about an hour now. We got to do our affirmations, how we do every single morning. We can't let everybody go until we do that. We got to make sure everyone leaves this call on a high note. Make sure that our spirits are high. And because right now it's a lot of great things going on. Let me mention this. If you did not know, May 1st is when we launch Culture Investment Group. May 1st, there were 60 people in Culture Investment Group. Today, it's 201 people in this group. So just unmute yourself because that is exciting. Yes,
sir.
yes.
Yes.
201
Let's go.
Yes. That is amazing, guys. Then what does that mean? That means we are impacting lives. That means we are really changing lives. We're really doing something meaningful. All right, everyone needs what we have, not only for the mindset, but everybody needs this skill. So I applaud each and every one of you for going out there, helping people learn, you know, how they can make money from their phone, helping people learn how they can become more financially independent. All right, remember, we can't do anything if we broke. All right, we can't do nothing if we broke. So we have to make sure that we are utilizing what we have, that we're making sure that we're serious about learning this skill of investing, making sure that we're serious about sharing this information. I love each and every one of you. Let's go ahead and unmute ourselves. The first affirmation: I am so happy and grateful that I create world change. I'm so happy and grateful that I am a world leader. I'm so happy and grateful that there are 50 P1000s in CIG. Let's go ahead and unmute ourselves. Matter of fact, let me unmute everyone.
I'm so happy and grateful.
I'm so happy and grateful now that I am a world leader.
That I'm a world leader.
I'm grateful now that
Grateful that I'm a
world change.
thousand.
P1000s inside of the culture.
World change. Happy and grateful.
Obviously, versus 2000 being grateful. Happy and grateful now that P600 are change. Happy and grateful now that I'm a world leader.
World change.
I'm so happy and grateful now that I'm a culture investor.
I'm a part of culture.
Happy and grateful.
Happy and grateful.
Now that I am learning.
I'm taking lives all
So
over the
happy and
world.
grateful that I'm a world change.
Happy and
Happy and grateful that
now
there's
that I'm building
50
generational
1000.
wealth and family respect. So happy and grateful now. Happy I told you I'm living my life. Happy and grateful now that I impact my home. Grateful now that I'm a world
Happy and grateful now for this
opportunity.
opportunity.
Grateful now that everyone now that my P150 at the end of this month. Every six figures.
So happy and grateful now
And
that
grateful
I'm given this opportunity to transition.
150,000 organization.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Again, thank you to both of the attorneys for coming in today. Culture, we love you. We appreciate you. Go online right now and say, pound, we different. Culture Investment Group, period. Because that's what we are. Love you guys. See you in the chat. This recording will be on Culture's YouTube page. So you guys can go back, make sure that you rewatch it. And again, it is not enough to just be sad, disgusted, upset. That's not enough. Move into action. Love you guys. See you in the chat.